This is the 2021 Genesis G70 Sport, and this one specifically is in the luxury trim. It comes with a twin-turbo V6 under the bonnet. It's got Brembo brakes, a sports exhaust, and it's rear-wheel drive. So it's the company's sportiest model that they make, tapping into its sports car origins, but then also giving it its current luxury flair. The direct rival to this would be something like the BMW 340i XDrive, but at 80,940 drive away starting for one of these with this specific motor and drivetrain. Is it worth buying this and saving your cash instead of going up to buy the German alternative? Now in this review, I'll walk you around the outside, bring you into the inside, and take it for a drive to let you know if you should consider getting a Genesis G70. And so with all that said, my name's Cameron, this is Product Review Cars, let's get into it. Now don't get it twisted, this is a good looking car. I love the muscular bonnet design, the grille, and the light design. Although I do think Genesis could have taken a leaf out of Alfa Romeo's book and moved this license plate out of the way and off to the side somewhere. Now around the side, what I do like and what stands out are these wheels. These are 19-inch in diameter, and they really do a good job of complementing this pearlescent white paint. It's not my favorite spec, but hey, at least it stands out a little bit here. Now housed inside these wheels are some giant Brembo brakes, and yes, this vent is real, so at least we see some legitimate performance parts fitted to the G70. Additionally, this Michelin rubber will help us a little bit out when we're on for our drive. They do a great job of gripping, and I'll show you that in just a second. Now, the actual profile of the G70 is nice and short in its dimensions. It's not too big. It's not something like a bit of a hatchback design like you'd see on the Kia Stinger, and it's certainly a lot tighter than the BMW 3 Series. Now, around the back, you can see just how short this boot lid is, and it's got a bit of a uptick to it, but there's no real big spoiler happening at the back. You've got those similar Genesis design lights you see on all of its sort of sedan models, and this goes very nicely with the front lights that you saw earlier. Now, what's happening around the back? Well, we do have real dual exit exhaust, and it's a bit modest as well because there's actually quad exhaust here, and that's where the sports exhaust hides. And here's what it sounds like. Now, there's a couple ways to open the boot in the back of the G70. One of them is walking up to the back just like this, and if your hands are full, it will automatically open the tailgate. If that annoys you, you can turn that off from the inside. There's also a button on the boot, button on the key, and a button on the inside, which you can all open and close this boot from. Sadly, boot space isn't the best in the G70. It's just under 400 liters in here, and it's a little bit tight. There's a bit of a shallow floor as well, because there is a spare tire hidden underneath the boot floor, but you still get all the Genesis amenities like the tire changing kit, which has a padded mat in there so you can kneel down. It's got gloves, it's got hand sanitizer, it's got everything you might need. There's a first aid kit and a warning triangle, so you're properly equipped in case of an emergency. Now, something that's not so great along the side are the size of some of these panel gaps. You can see the sun rays shining through it, and it just doesn't make it look like it's all neatly put together on occasion, especially when you can see through and see the sun's rays just peeking through on the other side. Now, I expected the Genesis G70 to be a shrunken down version of the bigger brother G80, but instead what it is sort of like its own car. It does take a few elements that I've seen in the Kia Stinger, like this shifter and this screen, and it sort of made this feel a little bit more sporty and a little bit more luxurious. The doors feel nice and hefty. There's some nice aluminium trim around the cabin. Everything feels quite nice and plush to touch. The leather looks fantastic. I love the quilted design. I love how the stitching comes down to the center console. The buttons are nice and soft to touch. Everything in here is relatively quite nice and definitely lives up to the price tag that this car asks. This 10.25-inch touchscreen display we've seen in a few other of Hyundai and Genesis cars. It's really nice and crisp, and it's really easy to use with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It's also got Bluetooth audio as well, so if that's how you like to drive around, and it's also really easy to touch compared to some of other Genesis cars where you sort of have to reach quite far forward. This is easy to interact with, and it's nice and bright here on the dashboard. The driver's display in front of me is a 3D design, so it's quite interesting. If you've ever seen a Nintendo 3DS, you'll know what I'm talking about, but it's basically a 3D display without needing 3D glasses. A bit of a gimmick, but it looks kind of cool nonetheless. There's a heads-up display, and there's some paddle shifters along here, and there's a drive mode button in the middle. That's really all you have to know when you're driving the Genesis G70. The upgraded Lexicon sound system, which is like an upgraded version of the Harman Kardon sound system, is nice and punchy and definitely a worthwhile upgrade if you think it's something that you might want in a car like this. Now, there were some downsides in here that didn't really add up to the Genesis brand in my opinion, and that included these cheap feeling indicator stalks. They're just a bit chintzy and nothing that I thought was too special. Along with the hard scratchy plastics found here on the steering wheel, it's just something which you immediately touch. I thought they could have put this soft touch material here in the middle. Now there is a wireless charging pad here up the front. However, I did find it a little bit difficult to put my phone down on it and have it charge consistently just because of how big it is. Now there has been a few rattles while I've been driving around too, a bit more than I would like for $80,000. And look, that's really my only complaints up front. In the back, however, it's not going to be too good for your tall passengers. Now the back seats of the G70 are pretty tight. As someone who's 5'11", I'm already at my limits for headroom when I put my head all the way up, and my feet are pretty tight along with my legs. This is my normal driving position, and look, I'm pretty tight back here. Additionally, I really don't like how this seatbelt for the middle seat passenger digs into my back because it sits right behind me on long trips, so that's a little bit annoying. Now, Genesis do recognize that this is a tight back seat, so much so they put controls for the front left passenger seat for the rear left passenger to get themselves some more room on longer trips. You do have a center armrest, but that does make a lot of farting sounds. I promise that wasn't me. And that does add a little bit more comfort back here. Additionally, we have tri-zone heated seats, so that is something a bit more advantageous for the back seats here to keep you a bit more comfortable, and there's a single charging port in the rear. Now middle seat passengers are non-existent. This transmission tunnel is just far too high to have 3 adults in the back comfortably. If you really have to use it, you do have a seatbelt here. Now think of this as more as like a sports car that has sedan practicality, and here's why. And that is because it is an absolute fun car to drive. The Genesis G70 has sacrificed some of its luxury items that we've seen in the likes of the G80 and the GV80 in terms of having a cushiony sort of brake feel and a sort of relaxed driving feel as well, all in the name of performance. So what we have here is a twin turbocharged 3.3 litre V6, and this is the Lambda motor that we've seen in the likes of the Kia Stinger. Now, pickup in this car is phenomenal. I'm really impressed with it. What we have on tap is 274 kilowatts and 510 newton meters of torque, all being sent to the rear wheels. Unlike the BMW, this has more torque, but it is down on kilowatts compared to that. And because it lacks an all-wheel drive system, that means we're seeing 0 to 100 figures in around 4.7 seconds claimed, compared to the BMW's slightly quicker 4.4 seconds. Now, those cross bracing struts you can see in the engine bay do a great job of keeping this car nice and taut through corners, and that Michelin rubber just sticks in all the right places. I'm playing between 2 different drive modes while out on some fun bits of driving road. Sport is the one that's going to keep you nice and safe. It's going to avoid the car slipping out from underneath you, and it's just going to give you a bit more play in terms of responsiveness in the throttle, and just a bit more fun in terms of the sound that comes out the back of the car. Dial that up to 11 by putting this into Sport Plus, and you feel the seat bolsters actually adjust from Comfort into Sport and Sport Plus to keep you a bit more tight in the seat. And what you have is a absolute riot of a driving experience, and that's what this car is all about. It's all about having a sports car driving experience and feel in a traditional V6 front-engined rear-wheel drive setup. Now you can manually shift, and look, I recommend it because shifts are rapid, especially under acceleration, and because this only comes in an automatic, that's not a downside. A manual might have been fun to see, but this automatic, even with these paddle shifters, is really nice to engage with. The paddle shifters are the only way to shift manually, and look, it does a great job of just flying through the gears. It's really responsive whether or not you're shifting by yourself, and I've had a ton of fun driving in this car. Now in Sport Plus, do be careful in the likes of being in the rain or taking some sharp corners, because all that torque has to go somewhere, and the car does have a tendency to kick out on the rear wheels. And even in a launch control situation, you just have to make sure you're on the throttle and just on the steering a bit more than you would in an all-wheel drive setup. Now, some say the steering is a little numb, but look, the suspension feel makes up for that, so you can feel exactly what's happening on the road, even though the steering wheel isn't absolutely giving you the 100% feedback you might be craving. But look, this car is a Genesis. It's not a devoted sports car, even though it's doing most of the right things to be a sports car. So that means you should expect this car to be comfortable while driving and add a bit more of a sporty element. Now, that bimodal exhaust does open up when you go into Sport Plus, and it sounds cracking. I absolutely love the sound this thing makes. And look, with all the sporty drive, you're actually getting a respectable average fuel economy figure of around 12.6 litres per 100 Ks. And for a big, thirsty V6 like this one, that's pretty good. Now, mid-range acceleration is quite impressive with all that torque. So if we go down a couple of gears, we'll go and give it a bit of a push on the throttle. So we'll bring the speed down a little bit, and here we go. Oh, just rapid on that acceleration, and it's a lot of fun too. Now, once you're done enjoying your sporty drive, you can knock this back into comfort mode, and that just relaxes the input to the throttle and just allows this car to become just more of what you'd expect from a Genesis. There is an eco mode if you're really having a tight week with the fuel budget, but I wouldn't really recommend jumping into that. There is a custom mode, but that's really if you want the Goldilocks mode between sport and comfort. That's really what I would say. I think Sport Plus is absolute fun, but it's not something you want all the time, and I think Sport does a good job of being that in between, having a bit more of a sporty drive or also being a bit more comfortable and safe. Now, what do I notice while driving? Well, I thought there was a bit of wind noise, but actually the rear diff is making quite a racket, and it sounds a little bit like a race diff. It's sort of something you can possibly hear in the background. It's a bit of a whine, and it's quite annoying if you want a completely silent cabin. So that is just something to note. Additionally, you've heard a few creaks and rattles while I'm driving along here. And is that something I'd really expect from an $80,000 car? I don't think so. I think that's just something that needs to be fixed on Genesis' side, and that just makes me not entirely fall in love with this car like I did with the G80 and the GV80. It does have some imperfections in that department. So I had a lot of fun driving this. I actually really like the Genesis G70. However, if it's bang for buck you're after for 20 grand less, you can get the Kia Stinger GT with this motor, more boot space and more rear space for your passengers. Now, that's the best bang for buck. And if you want the best luxury experience and also more space for your passengers and a little bit more boot space, you'll have to go for the BMW 3 Series, leaving this in third place. It doesn't mean I don't like it. It just means it's got two different priorities going on, luxury and bang for buck, and there's two different cars that do that just a little bit better. Now, I definitely say go and test drive one of these if you're interested, just to scratch that itch and figure out what it's all about, because it's still a ton of fun to drive. So if you want sort of like a Kia Stinger experience, but with a bit more luxury, that's where this fits in. Now, thank you so much for watching. My name's Cameron. This has been Product Review Cars. I'll see you in the next one.